Thanks again for everybody coming here. I have seriously a lot of respect for the fact that you're being proactive in this process. I think some people go out there a little bit blind, and to learn what to expect is definitely a good idea. My name is Donn Anderson. I was the education chair of the home inspectors for about 15 years. I've done over 16,000 inspections, and I'm really tired. And I look at $4 and $5 million homes and 20,000 brand new and 170 years old, and really they're all alike. You know, like the $5 million homes down on Lake Geneva, just on a different site. So you know, like some of that is it, but some of them are pretty nice. And I look at very modest homes as well. I have this Catholic guilt thing going on. I have to think of every one of my clients as if you're my kids, and that's just the way it is. I see people, unfortunately, fortunately I work with about a dozen different law firms as an expert witness, and sometimes, especially with flippers, people that are buying a house and selling them, sometimes they'll take a basement and they'll cover it up and you can't see what's going on, and there could be some issues behind that. So I guess first of all, I want to let you know that I do give a discount to anybody that uses us, that was at Landmark. I did, Saturday we had a meeting of the home inspectors, and we had one of our big seminars, and I had an award recognized for being old. My state ID number is 7, and I think the other 6 guys are probably retired. At least we hope that's what's going on. When you pick a home inspector, you really want to make sure you're checking credentials. I can't stress enough, if I think of you as my family, I can't stress enough, do not call somebody up, a home inspector, and you really should, you know, check them out. I hope you use me, but make sure you check out others as well. But don't start out with how much do you charge. You really want to check out their credentials first. I had 2 people call me last week and said, wow, I got really shafted on my last one, and I checked out your credentials. But you want to know not just how long they've been doing it, but of course that is a good question. You know, ask them what their state ID number is. It'll kind of give you an idea. How many inspections have they done? Are they full or part-time? There's a couple of documents in the back, and one of them kind of looks like that, and on the back of it, it has 17 different questions you can ask. Another one of the documents that you really want to tune into, it's the state standard of practice. It's only 2 pages, but it's so important for you to read that and understand what it is. I can't help but believe that anybody buying a house, especially for the first time, you might be thinking home inspection. Well, that's going to cover absolutely everything that has to do with a home. You know, like the home inspector is going to look at every square inch of the roof, and they're going to look at every square inch of the basement. But a home inspection is kind of like going to a doctor for a checkup. You go to a general practitioner, and the doctor says, I think I hear a little bit of an irregular heartbeat. I want you to go see a cardiologist. Same thing that a home inspector does, or they should do. A home inspector, normally they're not estimators. I'm not an estimator, so it's kind of hard to say exactly what something's going to cost. Sometimes we'll have a rough idea what things are going to cost. A couple of things to remember is that water is the worst enemy of a house. Water can come in at the roof. You can have a brand new roof, and if they did not change out the flashing on the roof, you can have a brand new roof that leaks. So it's very important, you know, like that, you know something about that. Foundation problems can be really the most expensive, and if it's got a fresh coat of paint on the basement walls, something to think about, especially if it's, you know, paint on the walls and the floors. I don't know if you've seen any houses yet, but some houses in southeastern Wisconsin will have these steel braces on the basement walls. I don't know if anybody has seen those. Do not shy away from those homes. When you build a home, part of my background, I started in the trades in '68. I was the education chair for 15 years, but I'm a state and a federal inspector as well. And when you build a home in Wisconsin, the walls have to withstand 60 pounds per cubic foot of pressure. When you reinforce them, they have to withstand 90. So that house, once it's been reinforced, it's going to be much stronger than it ever was in the past. So don't look at it and say, hey, you know, this had problems, it could have problems again. And those numbers are going to be on the test at the end here, so just be aware of that. So as I was saying, you know, like, don't use, you know, like the dollar figure, but check the credentials. Home inspectors, for what it's worth, home inspectors are not looking for code issues. I happen to take a little pride in the fact that, you know, like I do stay on top of getting continuing education, because there could be an issue that somebody would miss, and they could say, if you had a complaint later on, say, hey, you missed that, or my plumber, my electrician said you should have caught this. It's not about the code. So, you know, like somebody could, you know, walk away from that and you'd get stuck paying the price on that. It's a good idea, again, to check their credentials immensely. So again, the big 6 parts of any house. Foundation problems are number 1, roof is number 2, windows, very important, that's number 3, and then heating, plumbing, and electrical. One of the things when I sit down with our clients, I usually do about a 10-15 minute dog and pony show when we first sit down at the house and explain, like what to expect when you're looking at a home inspection. But I can't stress enough, take some time to read through that standard of practice. I'll actually give you some chores to do if you hire me, which is to go through and check every window. We're only supposed to look at 1 window on each side of the house. That's 4 windows. I've never liked that, so I always check 1 in each room. But it's a good idea to get a feel for them, if it's going to be your home. So you want to make sure you take a look at that. Any questions that you can think of?
Like you said, there could be hidden damage behind the wall from a basement.
Absolutely.
How do you guys check to see if everything is okay?
We don't know. I was at one today that, again, it was a flipper in Tosa, and in the basement, it looked beautiful. The bathrooms, the kitchen, just gorgeous, just beautiful, beautiful house. But the first thing I do when I walk up to a house is I'll take a look, they call it the beam pocket. So if this was the house, for example, the center beam is right here. So on that side of the house and this side of the house, from the outside, sometimes you can see that the wall was pushed in because the steel is going to stay there. So I'll see if there's movement. You also want to take a look at the corners, and these are things that you can do. Well, both corners on the front of the house, there was some big cracks in there. So I knew that there was a problem in there. I get downstairs, and there was drywall all over everything. Another thing you can look at when you go into the basement to see if the basement windows are at an angle a little bit, because if it's been at an angle, those walls could have pushed in. Then you just have to decide for yourself, how much do you really love the house? Because a lot of times, if you were to tell somebody that just finished remodeling, hey, look, I need to tear off some of this drywall to take a look, to take some measurements of the walls, a lot of times they're going to say, no, you can't do it. I'm not saying to walk away from a house. I mean, brand new houses that are just built, but most of the time we're not going out and buying a brand new house. Most of the time it's something that's a little bit older. So at least be a little bit careful, because with a flipper, they do not have to disclose anything legally. I guess one of the other things that I do is I do take a very careful look. If this were the basement, I take a look to see if there's any signs of moisture coming through. But again, if somebody just, I cleaned it all up, they put a fresh coat of paint, sometimes you really don't see that. Okay, thank you very much. Oh, please.
Do newer basements, are they reinforced better compared to older houses?
Well, truth is no. You can buy a house that has a poured concrete basement. Now those are much stronger than concrete block. Concrete block are about 8 inches high, so you've got a mortar joint every 8 inches. Southeastern Wisconsin has a lot of clay soils. So what happens in the wintertime, the heat from the basement melts the snow on the outside, and usually the dirt is fairly flat. Over time it's going to settle. So that heat melts the snow, that water gets trapped in between the basement wall and the soil, and at night when temperatures drop, that water turns to ice. It expands about 10%, about 10,000 pounds of pressure pushing against those walls. So the best thing you can do, like I said, even though home inspection is not about the code, but one of the code statute says every foot away from the house, the soil should be ½ inch lower. 10 feet away from the house, you should be at least 5 inches lower. So instead of having the soil flat, you pitch it away. So instead of the water going into your basement, you just redirect it into your neighbor's basement. Well, you are listening. I thought you fell asleep on me. Okay, you don't have to do it quite that bad. But you can create swales. So in my reports, not only will I take about 200 pictures on each one, maybe 30 or 40 of them make it to the report, but I'll put diagrams in there. And what a swale is, you can call it a gully, a ditch, whatever. But sometimes if your neighbor's here and your house is over here and all their water's coming right at you, well, you can cut some of the soil out of here so it comes over here and then pulls away from the house. So that takes care of it. Again, a poured foundation is usually going to be a little bit more expensive, but with the blocks, as long as you take care of the grade. And along those lines, this is also very, very important, but a code that goes right along with that, if this were the top of the basement wall and your joists, your floor joists are over here, the soil on the outside should be about 4 to 6 inches below that. A lot of people don't understand this. They just keep adding soil. Sometimes they'll add soil and figure that, well, this is going to pitch everything away. There's a wicking or a capillary action. If I spilled water on a countertop and touched it with a paper towel, that water is going to wick right up that paper towel. Well, the same thing happens with snow. When the snow melts, that can wick up behind the siding and then start rotting out the rim joists, rotting out parts of the house. So now the house, two-story house, snow loads, it's going to crush that rotted wood. Windows start cracking, drywall starts cracking. So you just want to make sure you keep the soil low and keep everything pitched away from the house. And then once a year, always a good idea, a daylight savings time. We hand out a maintenance guideline. There's a checklist in there. They say water's the worst enemy, so make sure that somebody checks the caulking around the flashing around the chimney, caulking around the windows and doors, and then keeping that grade pitched away. Do not look at my house. Anything else? Please.
What goes into checking the heating and air conditioning?
Excellent question. Okay, we're required to turn it on, look for anything, because the state guidelines say it's to check observable conditions. So with the air conditioning, we're not even allowed to check it unless it's been at least 60 degrees for 24 hours. In the wintertime, you're kind of out of luck. So then it really depends on the age. 99% of the time, unless the data tag is worn out, we can see how old it is. When I was a kid back in the 50s and 60s, furnaces and air conditioners would last 40, 50 years. Now they're a lot more energy efficient, but they only last 15 to 20 years. So once I see it's getting kind of up to that end of its life, so to speak, I'll take a close look at the data tag on there, and then I can take the cover off, but I can't pull out the burners and the blower motors. So when we fire it up, I'll take a look. If it's not a high efficiency, if the flames are rolling out, that typically means there's a crack in a heat exchanger. You might win a new furnace. If there's too much corrosion or rust around the chambers of the heat exchanger, again, that could be there's a crack. Another thing that's very important, quite often you're going to have your furnace here, the part above it is called the plenum, and that's where the A coil lives for the air conditioner. Well, often that drain line from there gets plugged up and that water starts leaking on the inside. So I'd recommend that if you're looking at a house that has an air conditioner, go down and look at the furnace, and if you see green or white streaking there, it's kind of like an iceberg. What we see on the outside, it might be a lot worse on the inside, and it could have cracked it. And I've gotten a call back from an attorney one time. He said, "Don, thanks so much. You told me you couldn't disassemble it. You saw this. You told me to bring in my guy for a further evaluation, and you were right. Cracked heat exchanger, you just saved me $4,000." One of the things that you might want to all consider, there's the cost of a home inspection, but I hate to throw out a number like $1,000, but you might want to have a couple $100, at least a couple $100 extra, in case your home inspector finds something significant. If we go into a basement, now home inspectors generally don't measure the walls, but I'll take a plumb bob, and if there's too much movement in there, then I'll say bring in a structural engineer. A structural engineer could cost $300 or $400, maybe even more sometimes. If we see signs of moisture, if there's drain tile testing that needs to be done, that could be $400 or $500. So there's different issues that we discover. You said heating, and what was the other one? Heating and cooling? Air conditioning, yeah. With the air conditioning, same thing. We can check the temperature drop across the coil. Sometimes, if you're in the trades, you already know this. You can put your hand there sometimes. But if you know where to check the temperatures, we can do that. Again, being at the end of its design life is important. And as a home inspector, I think it's just a really good idea to know my limitations and to say that I'm a general practitioner, and I've got to know when to say, bring in, the specialist. You must be a nurse the way you just laughed at that. Okay, yeah. Anything else? All right, thanks very much. Appreciate it. You bet. If you like this video, please share it. Don't forget to like our Facebook page and subscribe to our YouTube channel.